Welcome to the Bell Tech Talk segment of the Vertical MRO podcast. This segment takes you into the nuts and bolts of helicopter maintenance. It's about safety, support, and operational readiness. Top priorities for the Bell team. Join us for technical insights and personal stories from the front lines of helicopter maintenance from the industry-leading experts at Bell.
Hey, welcome to the Vertical MRO Bell Tech Talk edition. I'm today's host, Jon Gray. Excited to have a really cool conversation with two really experienced guests from Bell. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about Autopilot systems. That's a system that I love. You know, my experience as a pilot, I feel like that's one of the things that's making the industry more effective and efficient. And we talk about the safety threshold that we have gained through these Autopilot systems is absolutely amazing. So I think a lot of folks, especially listening to this podcast, will be like, well, it's great that we have all these efficiencies in flight, but what does that mean for us on the ground? You know, in a lot of ways, these systems, it's one more system for people to monitor, to troubleshoot, and maintain as they go. So this is a great conversation to have with our Bell friends and to help the folks operating Bell equipment understand, you know, what they can do and how these systems are maintainable from within your own programs. So with us to have this conversation is Tad Morley. Tad, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No.
And Don, I'm going to probably mispronounce your last name, so I'm going to let you give it a shot before I butcher it.
It's Don Lehto.
Okay. So Don, let's start with you. Can you just introduce yourself? Let us know what your current role is and where you're coming to us from.
So my name is Don Lehto, as we talked about. I am currently a customer service engineer for Bell Helicopters. Started about a year ago, but my primary background in aviation, began in the Navy as an avionics troubleshooter on the Seahawk, which is the Navy's version of the Black Hawk. And then I moved to a facility out here in Colorado, which is where I live now. We were converting the Firehawks and EMS helicopters for air methods. So that was a great experience. And that's how I got on with Bell eventually. So
that's cool. Yeah. Tad and I were talking offline about the military and kind of getting into the life lessons that you learned and the career trajectory that you gain from your experience in the military. And so both you and Tad have that experience. So interesting that, those things really do set you up for success. And I'll be interested to hear about some of your experiences as we go through the podcast. But Tad, for you, can you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So Tad Morley, I've been with I'm Bell Product Support here in Piney Flats. I've been with Bell 18 years now, and I started my aviation career in the Air Force working at F-15 avionics.
Awesome. Yeah. So both of you guys have a lot of experience in avionics outside of what you do with Bell. Don, going back to you, how did you end up in the Navy and how did you end up kind of in the avionics world?
Well, so I lived in a really small town in Oregon. And, my family, as amazing as they are, they just didn't really have money to go to college. And I had some scholarships lined up, but I didn't know how long lasting those were going to be. Typically you get them for a year and then you don't get them anymore. So I was like, well, I'll join the Navy and then I'll get my experience there and then I'll go to school. And then I didn't get out at 4. I ended up extending for another 2 years because we were going to do this really fun detachment. So I did 6 years and I was like, you know what? I'm never touching an aircraft again. That was enough for me. And immediately I went right back to aircraft. So
was the aircraft world, the aviation side, was that your goal from the onset when you joined?
No, I was going to go into the medical field and then, they just didn't have any corpsman slots open. And so I remember I was sitting in an office with my recruiter and I was like, well, aviation sounds really cool. And then I got top of my class in A school. So I got to pick where I went and I was like, San Diego and helicopters. That's all I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I stayed there the whole time and I don't regret it at all.
I don't think there's much better in the world than San Diego and helicopters. Two of my favorite things.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Very cool. Where'd you get a chance to live at in San Diego?
I lived in a few different places, but I was stationed on Coronado.
Oh, nice.
But I wasn't wealthy enough to live on Coronado, so.
Yeah, I don't think many people are. Coronado's a beautiful place. Tad, for you had an interesting path to aviation. Can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah. Well, so of course, I joined the Air Force. Simply, when I went to the Air Force, I was looking, after the Air Force. So I picked jobs that didn't have anything to do with the aviation, like heavy equipment operator, mechanic, things like that. I was looking for roles that I might be able to come back home and find a job. But Air Force needs come first, and I wound up working on F-15s.
And it's funny looking back, it's probably something that you couldn't have picked a better route, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
it's interesting how those things work themselves out.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's been very good to me, and I really enjoy it.
Now, you get out of the Air Force and you go from working on jets to helicopters. What was that transition like for you?
Well, actually, I didn't start the helicopter world till after I was actually a Ford mechanic for a long time. I didn't even know Bell was here. At the time, it was Edwards. So after 9/11, right after 9/11, I joined, the National Guard and went active duty. When I got back home from my first deployment, I was just driving to the VA to register, and I see this helicopter land over here in Piney Flats. So I just drove over to see what was going on over there. I walked in the door, and that's what they's hiring. And I got on a Bell helicopter 18 years ago.
Wow. What an interesting turn of events.
Yeah.
Pretty cool that you can just stop by Bell and be like, hey, you got a job? Yeah, come on in.
I was pretty lucky. Timing was perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, timing is everything in most instances. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, you guys in the avionics side, I think you have one of the most niche areas of expertise that exists in my opinion. The expertise that you guys hold is so valuable today. When I think about public safety aviation, which I was a part of, all of our mission equipment, all of our specialized mission equipment would fall in your hands most of the time when it comes to troubleshooting, trying to come up with solutions to the problems we're having. Obviously, you guys are drawn to that. You've had a long experience in avionics, but talk about your experience having been in the avionics sector as long as you guys have. And Don, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can say is when things break, they break really well avionics wise. I think mechanics have it a bit harder in the routine of all the work that has to be done very routinely inspection wise. But avionics, when something breaks, it breaks in a really fun way that I always really liked. Right, I wouldn't say I naturally came into avionics. I wasn't just right off the bat, oh, she just gets it. She's got it. I had to really work at it. And that meant staying late to fix the problems and staying late to figure out what they were. And I always really liked that because I like puzzles and I like, anything along those lines, anything that is kind of difficult. It's kind of where I catch my stride.
Yeah.
But yeah, it didn't come naturally to me at all, to be honest with you.
What would you say is the most challenging aspect of avionics?
Challenging? I think it's just learning the systems and learning honestly, the computer programs that go along with those systems and the software that goes along with those systems. I wouldn't say any of it is hard. It is just figuring out those things and who to talk to. I will say that the avionics industry and just the helicopter industry in general, it's not whether you know everything. You're never going to know everything.
Right.
But it's finding the network of people that you do know you can contact. And I think that's really helped out a lot as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's where Bell's strength is there's always one of you folks that can be contacted. And if you don't know the answer, you've got a whole network of other folks that do have the answer or potentially will. We talk about networking a lot on the podcast, and I feel like how you just described that is a really good example of why networking is so important, because you don't ever know anything. That's why I think aviation is so interesting and challenging is because you never get to a point where you know it all, and if somebody thinks they know it all, then they're confused because I don't think that's even possible.
I work with some of the best helicopter mechanics in the industry. And one thing they tell me is these guys have been doing this for 30 plus years. And they're like, I'm learning every day. I learn something new every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's exciting for me. It never is dull, Tad, for you, what's your experience been and some insights on some of the things we've talked about already?
Yeah. So I guess the biggest thing, that I've seen and have learned is probably a lot of times it's easy to go down that rabbit hole where you think that's, it's always like the most difficult problem. It's the most, I got it moment. when 9 times out of 10 is really the simplest thing that bites you. So, it's very hard to do, even as an experienced tech, not to go after that fascinating issue when, dang, it's just a loose wire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as pilots, we're pretty susceptible to falling into the trap of, hey, this thing's not working. Well, it's not working because you didn't turn it on.
Exactly.
Something as simple as, like we joked about,
Yeah.
does not work in the OFF position. Then the troubleshooting a lot of times is as simple as turning it off and turning it back on and seeing if it works.
That's right.
But the advanced skill set you guys have in that side is really interesting. A lot of folks refer to you guys as Sparkies. Is that a term of endearment, or is that something else?
I like it. It doesn't bother me at all.
It doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, again, our goal today is to talk about autopilot systems and in particular the systems that exist within Bell Aircraft. Can you kind of give us a preview of those systems and some of your initial thoughts as it pertains to those autopilot systems?
So my thought is, it's probably the largest asset that the pilot could ever have. I mean, it's a great system. It allows him to focus on more, task demanding events. He has less to worry about. So I mean that's a huge factor. And the systems, as far as the technology is just getting so advanced. I mean, it's becoming fly-by-wire now. You get integrated to pretty much everything now. GPS navigation. VOR, ILS, SARS now, the search and rescue software is amazing. That's just crazy what it can do now.
Right.
I mean, it's just a great system. I wish I could specify more about it, but it's just, as a pilot yourself, I mean, it takes such a workload off the pilot, and he's so less he has to worry about.
The safety side of things, you talk about double INC scenarios and being able to hit the auto level button that is integrated within a lot of those autopilot systems is huge. I think that will save a lot of lives as we go.
It will.
Don, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, every year it gets a little more complex. So I can't wait to see where we're at, 10 years down the line. You start out with some of our older, more legacy aircraft and at the time they were something special, but they're quite simple systems when you look at what's involved in them in the troubleshooting. And then nowadays, Tad was talking about the fly-by-wire. We're going to see that with the 525, just reducing the mechanical components so you don't have to change as much, and also reducing the redundancy so that, out of the three systems that make up that piece of equipment, it can fly on one, so if anything were to happen, you would still be set. I think we'll continue to see that grow, especially as hum systems in Bell helicopters grow as well. I think you'll see a lot more predictive analysis of like, oh, hey, this component's about to go bad. You might want to do something about that. Starting out, they were quite simple, but they packed a big punch, and they're quite reliable in general, even to this day, with where they're at.
Can you talk about the systems that exist within your airframes that you find yourselves working on most often? Not from a maintenance standpoint, but I guess I'll refine the question. Just essentially, what systems do you guys see in most Bell aircraft as far as autopilot systems go?
Well, we have our Bell Autopilot.
Mhm.
That's the one I think we tend to work on the most, not because there's anything wrong with it, and Tad can agree or disagree on this, but we see a lot of any type of friction in that system will cause it to not pass its IBIT. So it's built-in test. And that can be really challenging for operators that do not have an avionics background to interpret what's going on. Everybody's first instinct was it's broken, but there's a lot of reasons that friction can be induced in the system, some of which are super simple, some of which, wear on parts, things like that. So we do troubleshoot that a lot, but I wouldn't say it's from anything's incorrect with the system. Like, we don't get a lot of troubleshooting where the aircraft is just really messed up. Do you understand what I'm saying when I...
Yeah, right. The friction you're talking about, what kind of indicators do you see on the screen that somebody might find themselves looking at and be like, what does this mean?
Typically, and sorry to jump in, Tad, we don't see a lot of indicators on the screen. The pilot will go to do something in flight and it won't work, or the maintainer will go to initiate a built-in test and it won't complete a built-in test, or it won't try to.
I see.
So from our standpoint, we then have them download the FCC fault codes. And what we'll see is when it's friction, you can kind of see it right away. It can say things like, oh, every trim actuator you have is bad or is failing, which the likelihood of every trim actuator you have failing is pretty low. Or it'll say like every trim actuator is failing, or your CBAS actuators are failing. Again, pretty low to see that many failures of actuators themselves, right? That's not like a component that would be causing that. We also have really good troubleshooting guides in there as well, that when it says, oh, hey, if you see this fault code that says your actuator might be failing, it says check your cyclic friction. That's typically what we see the most of, especially with our EMS operators, because they're swapping from duals to single pilot controls just for training. And then they won't go in and readjust the balance springs in the seat wells. And that causes friction, believe it or not. So your autopilot will not pass its test.
Yeah, would you say that's the most common issue you see?
On 407s, hands down. It's not even close.
By far.
Okay.
At least me. Tad probably sees some more interesting ones, but.
No, it's by far, it's usually friction. It's usually balance spring issue. And
okay. Kind of what she was talking about primarily when you're going from single pilot to dual or vice versa.
It is. And of course, the tech data kind of it kind of needs to be more specific, and we're working on that. Basically, there's a couple of checks that they need to perform instead of going by measurements. So, and that right there would probably eliminate a vast majority of the cases if we just do that instead of just following a specific measurement.
What are some of the other common issues you guys are finding, aside from the friction issue?
Well, I mean, components do fail. You see that quite a bit as far as, rod end bearings, so forth, bell cranks, swash plate friction. I mean, it is a good system, to give you an indication. It's just, you start to have something wire. When that friction has come from a wire item like bell cranks and so forth, it's Autopilot will give you, it'll say, hey, I might want to engage because I feel resistance back on the controls. So it'll give you a degrade or a fail. And of course, at that point in time, they just need to follow, troubleshooting tasks and start isolating, the AFCS system or the autopilot system from the airframe, and then just follow the line. It's going to lead you directly to the issue.
And from a maintainer standpoint, I think it's really important to ask yourself what you were doing before you got the AP degraded or AP fail, because a lot of the times, yes, we get friction induced issues, but a lot of the times it's like, oh, well, we just came out of a 12-month inspection or an annual, like we just came out of some big inspection. I always used to like to say this, and this might be wrong, but especially in avionics, like every technician you meet, they know it all. Like it couldn't be anything we did. But the easiest answer is who had our hands in the system last. So I was always like, what did I do? Like, what did I touch? Where was I at? What were we doing? Because we see that with these systems all the time, right? You get out of a 12-month and you're like, well, you touched the swash plate. You were messing around with this area, right? Like, we lived in that area.
Well, that's huge because nobody's perfect, right? We're all subject to distractions and I don't want to say complacency, but sometimes that sets in. We find ourselves in a position where you're in the middle of doing something and someone comes to ask you a question and then you're like, what was I doing? So that's where I think we sometimes find ourselves in a situation where we're like, I didn't do that. You're like, well, actually you did because you're distracted for whatever the reason was. But complacency is an issue. I think that we talk about at length in our industry, whether you're on the maintainer side, the pilot side, it's an issue that we battle all the time. How, for you guys as avionics techs, 'cause I feel like everything you do it's so critical. How do you fight that complacency from your perspective?
Yeah, well, in the completion world, it was a little different. When I was managing and doing completions, my thing was, okay, if you've worked on it for, 5 to 6 hours and you don't know where to go, we need to call somebody. Like, let's not waste a ton of time especially when in a lot of these scenarios, you know, these operators are under stress. Like that's the only way to put it, especially if their helicopter down means for EMS helicopters or firefighting helicopters, it means, you know, lives saved, home saved.
Right.
You don't want your helicopter down, right? So they're under stress. So it's like, if you can't figure it out within 4 to 6 hours, come to me. Like, who can we call? Who's going to have a different perspective on this? What eyes can we put on this that are fresh, that are not frustrated, that are not downtrodden, right? Like,
Yeah, that's huge. Again, your guys' skill set's so specialized. You know, I feel like reaching out to the experts when there's something you're scratching your head on is the best and I want to say easiest thing to do, but it's the best thing to do for sure.
well, and me as a Bell customer support and service engineer, my thing is I don't want you to call me when you're at your limit, like when you're in the red and you're getting yelled at. Like, I want you to call me way before that. Let's work it out when you're still in the green and yellow, you know? Because then you're not just like beaten down, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Getting back to the systems we're talking about, aside from the friction issue and some of the things, we talked about troubleshooting, utilizing some of the reference material that's available. Can you talk about some of the submenus that maybe folks could find that might help them with some of those troubleshooting processes?
So the Bell 407 and the 429 are actually set up decently well. The Bell 407 in the AFCS section has a whole troubleshooting guide. It's like a 3-part breakdown guide of, hey, do this, do this, do this. Like, all these steps should be done first before you start removing and replacing components. You know, our experts, I'm never going to consider myself an expert, but some of these guys that have been here 30 plus years, they worked really hard on these manuals, and they'll tell you, you know, it's like 75% of all of our gripes, if not more, is friction. About 20% is pilots, you know, using their own checklists and not the flight manual supplement. And then the last like 5% is components are bad. Okay. Not saying components don't go bad. They do. It's just, they don't go bad as often as you'd think.
Right.
So they have a really good breakdown there. And then for people looking to download their FCC fault codes, I think that's really important to learn. And that can be found in AFCS under the FCC.
Okay.
A download event fault codes. And I think that's really important to take a look at as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how effective and efficient these systems have made us, again, on both sides of the world. A lot of times I think we operate these systems like they're a fax machine to that capability, but in reality, they're an iPhone. There's so much power behind these systems. There's so many things you can do with them. It just takes getting familiar with and understanding with navigating the different pages within these systems and understanding where these submenus are. Can you give some folks some advice on becoming familiar with the power of these systems, and in particular, what is available within the Autopilot system that they may not be aware of?
Well, I think, you know, of course, the 429 is a really good system because, you know, you actually have a display that shows you your, your AFCS status, you know, during your bit check. So, plus it gives you a real-time fault where you don't have to download. Of course, you know, you should still download it even though you have a DU fault. Just compare, you know, that information. Basically, it's just more or less, you know, just get into the manuals, understand the system, understand how, you know, SCAS works, how trim works. And once they get a good understanding of, you know, what the function of each one of those is, they'll be able to troubleshoot a lot better. And that's a huge thing.
I think time is the scarcity, like we were talking about. And Don, you brought up, you know, everyone's kind of pressured because you're wanting to get that aircraft off the ground and back in service to complete whatever mission it is that you want it to complete. So people are like, I don't have time to go digging through the manuals, but really we have to figure out a way to make yourself at least able to navigate and understand where to find the information. Don, from your perspective, any advice on that issue as far as, you know, getting familiar with navigating these systems and maybe some helpful pages that you found within the system?
I would say, you know, and I tell every mechanic this because, you know, mechanics are typically they err on the side of, let's leave the avionics to somebody else. Like, I don't want to do it, but you can turn any good mechanic into a pretty good avionics tech. And I'd say get into the manuals before you have an issue break. One of the biggest things we see with autopilot troubleshooting is not that they don't know how to do the things that they're doing. They do. And it takes them a minute and they figure it out pretty quick. But what they'll tell you, Tad and I were just working with some folks a couple weeks ago, and he was like, the guy, he told us, the last time I had this issue or an issue similar to this was about a year or two ago, and I'm just having to relearn all of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's typically how it happens is you'll have a big issue, 1 year, you don't see anything again for a year or two, and then you've completely lost all the skills you gained
Right.
back when you had to learn it the first time. So I'd say get into the manual beforehand. They're pretty easy to navigate, at least on 407, 429 side. Kind of get yourself thinking and reading up on the systems before anything like that happens, right?
Where do you find yourself most often in the submenus in the autopilot system?
Where do I find myself the most? So I would say in the FCC section of the 407 for the FCC download codes, because it tells you what each of the codes mean, but it does take a bit to learn how to read the codes. It kind of looks really intimidating when you get like a 20, 25 page document of all of these codes that mean nothing to you or me as an individual. So just going down that chart and reading all those codes, that's where I find myself the most. Tad, do you have a place you find yourself most often?
Yeah, I usually find myself in a rig data. I usually like to look at it and see what's changed from the initial rig information. Yeah.
Do you guys have any hotkeys that you found that have worked to get you into these menus quicker than what's typically necessary? And I guess I'll preface that by saying, when I flew, we would get error codes, and there was a way to get into that error code screen. I think there was a combination of pressing 3 buttons at the same time, and instead of having to go to these submenus, it would take you right into that screen. Is there a hotkey way of getting into those screens faster than might ordinarily be found?
Not for the light and intermediate. So the 412, you can get into a diagnostic screen pretty quick, but the 412 and the 429, the 420, at least it will give you a DU fault code on the FCS page. On the 407, it'll only give you, a degrade or a failed cast message. It's all the two things it'll give.
Okay.
Yeah. So you, for the lights, you really have to learn the computer system associated with downloading those faults. And we at Bell will read those for you, but I do recommend that everybody at least gives it an attempt to try to read those codes, because you'll learn a lot from it. And then when we tell you it's friction, or when we tell you it's a certain component and you're like, there's no way, you'll understand why we're saying it, right?
Yeah. It's funny as you're talking about working with somebody and they're like, I did this 2 years ago and I was fine then, and I've forgotten between now and then. It reminds me of putting together IKEA furniture. You get IKEA furniture and by the end of putting the thing together, you're an expert and you do it real quick. And the next time you go buy something, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like starting over again. So I think it's with any task, it's just when you're not working with it day in, day out, it becomes unfamiliar and you forget a lot. It's really cool that you guys are available to help folks with that expertise you have in those systems, because you are working on those systems day in and day out. Can we go to the evolution of these systems? The technology, I feel like, is changing so quickly, especially in the last 10 years. It's been really, really cool to see that technology change. But how has the evolution of this technology impacted the maintenance process, and what does it look like going forward?
Gosh, and it's went from using AC voltages, for, direction, attitude, control, and everything, to it's all digital now. I can't imagine in the next 10 years what it will be. I would say CAN bus. I think Garmin's already using that, and I think that's going to be another big major stall. The amount of information you can transmit over CAN is amazing. It's lightweight, components even smaller. ADAHRs are becoming, even more advanced. I can't imagine what it'll be like in 10 years. This is going to be amazing.
I think not necessarily with the AFCS. AFCS is going to evolve. I think you'll start to see more fly-by-wire aircraft in the commercial sector for helicopters. Hopefully, if when we get the 525 done, that'll be awesome. But I do think you're going to see a lot more hum systems evolve. And we kind of touched on this earlier, but I think you're going to see them evolve in a way that they can start to predict component failure quite before it happens. And we're already kind of seeing that, but I can only imagine what it's going to look like 10, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, today where we find ourselves with machine learning and we say AI as a broad term, but how those systems will make exactly what you're talking about more efficient, and make stuff. I don't want to say fail proof because that's not a possibility, but I think it'll give us information at a much faster pace, which is really exciting. And to see all these systems now talk to each other, I think is really neat. You talk about fly by wire, and essentially that's kind of what's happening is the systems essentially are able to talk, and I think that's really exciting.
Well, and it cuts down your components, right? It cuts down component failure because the less you have, the less mechanical components you have, the less you have to replace.
And I guess in that spirit, the more job security you guys have, right? or the more your workload grows, I guess is a different way to look at it. As these systems grow, we talk about on the Hangar Z podcast a lot, our DOMs that are in charge of a police department's aviation program. Not only are they responsible for taking care of the mechanical systems in these aircraft, but oftentimes we're asking them also to, hey, troubleshoot this piece of mission equipment, this autopilot system. We're asking these folks to do more and more as time goes, which is challenging. What tools or processes would you recommend that folks either go and get or they follow as they develop the skill set and working with these different systems?
It's a tough one.
So it is a tough one.
I think you're going to need some form of training, and that already exists today. So depending on the OEM, I don't see you being able to just do it all on your own unless and you could. I bet there's people way smarter than I am that could probably figure it out, but you're going to need some sort of training, and then networking. You're going to have to find people that the problem with the industry today, though, is that so many of the people that had this tribal knowledge or had all this experience working on these different airframes, they're getting out, they're retiring. They're moving to different positions that are more home-based. And I think that's really tough because now you have, 20 and 30-year-olds kind of running the industry, which is great for them. I was an ops manager at 30 years old, which is unheard of back in the day. But it can also be very it can be a big leap, right, from there. So really just you're gonna have to know people. And that's why I wanted to work with Bell, was because every time I called a tech rep at Bell, they answered. And I'm only calling if my hair's on fire. I'm not calling if I can't find something in the manual, like I will find it in the manual, but I'm calling, my hair's on fire, my back's against a wall, I need to get an aircraft up. And I always really respected that from an operator's standpoint. And so when I got the opportunity to work with Bell, I was like, I have to go.
Yeah, your guys' again availability and immediacy in your ability to help folks, I think is huge. And we talked about Bell's customer service all the time. In fact, the vertical the vertical survey just came out, and Bell once again was scored really high in customer service, and your ability to help folks get aircraft off the ground or troubleshoot issues is key. So I 100% agree with you, and that Bell is so good at doing that. Tad, any insight from you?
Yeah. So as far as, keeping up to date with new technology, that's going to be, that's always a challenge, right? So, and my advice is too, especially dealing with like mission equipment, when your CSE comes around and, talks to you, or your vendor for your MX-10 or whatever, ask them about it. Ask them, hey, what you guys working on that got coming out next? Get some inside information so you kind of sort of get a leg up and be prepared for whatever new system you want to work on someday. Yeah. And of course, once you get the manual, again, study it. Sit there and mess with that component so you understand exactly how it fully works.
Yeah.
But that's it. But also, again, how it fully works is kind of not really accurate because nobody ever fully understands aviation, like you said earlier. We're all learning every day.
Going back to some of the diagnostic data that we can get out of autopilot systems, and outside of the fault codes we talked about, are there any other diagnostic tools that people could find within the autopilot systems?
Yeah, you can use ADAHRS data as well.
Yeah.
The ADAHRS will spit out its own fault codes, and depending on what your FCC fault codes are telling you, especially for the 429. So I'm just going to say this is really relative to the 429 is depending on what your FCC fault codes are telling you, we might request that you get your ADAHAR's fault codes as well. And that can really help us pinpoint, what's going on inside that unit. So that sometimes helps. That doesn't sound like a lot, but I promise you, it's a ton of information.
Yeah. So the biggest problem, with the FCC information is, and really what they need to do is they need to have the maintenance manual open with the FCC fault log, because you have just tons and tons of what's called an event, the event code. So every time you sock a power on that, it goes through its own little bit. Whether you hit the I bit or not, it's still checking all these components. So you need to wade through all the muck until you actually see the issue. And that's the problem. So you'll have pages and pages and pages of just unuseful information until you see that code 432, I-bit fail, or trim fail. Until you see that, everything's just noise, and you got to learn just how to clean that noise off your plate.
Okay. We talk about preventative maintenance quite a bit too on the podcast, and the value of preventative maintenance. Is there preventative maintenance steps that people can take with these systems, whether it's ensuring that your pilots are following a checklist, or whether it's some other form of preventative maintenance as you go through different inspections? Is there something that people can do to kind of reduce some of what you guys are talking about with fault codes and friction issues and stuff like that?
I mean, to the checklist point, I think if you get a failure and your pilots use like an internal company checklist, right? They use their own checklist for starting and things like that. I think you need to hand them the flight manual supplement and say, hey, do what you just did, but do it with this. And then we can rule out that piece for failures as well, because we do see a lot of failures just on that. I totally understand why operators use their own checklist. I'm not knocking it, but it's when you see a failure that you need to revert back to the Bell flight manual supplement. That's huge for us.
I think what's interesting with checklists is a lot of times we fall into the trap on the flight side of things. We're doing things we've done because it's what we've always done. And that it incorporates checklists too. When we talk about as technology changes, sometimes that checklist needs to change to reflect this new technology we've just installed into the aircraft. But we don't. We're like, well, we've always done it. We've had this certain flow, and I don't want to change that. Where I think it's important as a maintenance community, as an aviation community as a whole, to look at these things and be, okay, how does this impact not only flight operations, but how does this impact maintenance, and how does this impact the checklist and these things that we're talking about? It's a good opportunity, I think, for folks to put their heads together and look at these things, be like, hey, let's either make it more efficient. Maybe there's some things we can reduce, or maybe there's a couple steps we need to add in the checklist to prevent what you guys are talking about. Yeah. Have you seen any good examples of operators or agencies doing just that?
Yeah, I've actually seen. I usually recommend to operators, especially fleet operators, to set some type of protocol up to start deleting non-volatile memory out of the FCC, because that just clears up that pool of information if they ever need it. They don't have to wade through all those pages and pages of information. It kind of just shortens the list. So one of the customers said he's going to do it on 30 days, just wipe the FCC and non-volatile memory. I recommend at least doing it for at least on your annual. Okay. Because when you look at 250 pages of FCC fault codes, you'll be like, I'm not going to get in.
What would you say is best practice as far as, wiping that memory?
I would like to see it every 30 days, but that's really up to the operator. I mean, honestly, if they call me, the first thing I'm going to do is get the download, then I'm going to tell them to erase it. Then I'm going to ask them to do an I-bit and give me that download. So basically all I'm going to do is, weed through all that first download, all that information, and compare faults with the clean download, and see if they same faults. And then I'm going to go from there. So
is there a reason or any advantage to holding on to those fault codes for, like you said, some people are holding on through the annual? Was there any benefit to that for folks?
And I don't think there's any benefit because if the system doesn't generate any fault, I mean, it's just noise. It's just pages and pages of noise. So, I mean, if they want to do it, if they come across an issue, they just want to retain it for historical record so they can compare to what they did last time. Yeah. I mean, that's Let's get common practice. I recommend to anybody that gets a new aircraft or that goes through some type of autopilot event where they got to do some major troubleshooting, just save those downloads and the rig data. Both those things are very important. If they got to change component, they'll wish they had that rig data sometimes.
Yeah. So that strikes me as the major piece of proactive maintenance that we can do on these systems is wiping those fault codes. Any other advice there, Don, as far as preventative maintenance on these systems?
Yeah, I mean, nothing that you wouldn't already know. Obviously, just doing your calendar inspections the way the book calls out, and not trying to skim over them. I think you might see things go bad beforehand, but again, I know we're talking about it like it fails a lot. The autopilot really doesn't fail a whole lot. So ideally, us as operators, we don't hear about it. She's good,
Right.
But my only recommendation for the people working on the aircraft would be get comfortable with your computer, get comfortable getting into your FCCs and downloading that data before anything breaks, because then when you get a fail, whether it's friction or a component or something else, you're not going to be intimidated by it. You know what I mean? It's not going to seem as big as it is. I couldn't stress that enough, because it's really not. It's not difficult. It's just intimidating to people that have never done it before.
Yeah, going back to what you said and what we talked about earlier, this conversation, it does seem like we're making it something it's not. This doesn't happen a lot, but I think that's where the challenge lies. Is because, again, going back to the IKEA furniture thing, if you don't work on it day in, day out, it is intimidating because you're just not familiar with the steps that are required to troubleshoot these things.
Absolutely.
I think that's where the huge value is in this conversation for folks that are operating these systems. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about how these systems integrate with other components within the aircraft and some of the advantages that exist because of that integration. What is your insight there, Don, on the integration of with different avionics systems?
I mean, primarily it's going to be your navigation system. I mean, integrating into your FMS and your navigation system are huge. You get things like your ILS approaches, you get things like your SBAS. Nothing too crazy. I mean, it's pretty simple for the autopilot system itself to do that, and us as maintainers don't see a ton of issues on that front. Typically, if the autopilot is passing IBIT and working, you're not going to see too many failures. But for a pilot, that's huge, right? It's just another thing, another repetitive task that he doesn't have to do over and over again while he's trying to do 7 other tasks, And I think flying, even in general, and you can speak on this probably way better than I could, because I'm not a pilot, but the systems that you're now having to monitor are way more than what they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Right now, everybody's got like 2 iPads in the front. They have a full G1000 avionics suite or whatever avionics suite they have. So they're trying to look at like 19 things at one time, and so navigation's huge for them. It just helps them one more step.
In a lot of ways, almost information overload. On both the pilot and the maintenance community too, because there's so many different. Again, going back to the menus, just knowing where to look for information. Same thing in flight. Understanding what's critical, what information is critical to look at, and what's just white noise. And so I think it's important to understand that. And again, getting into the manuals and understanding what you guys are talking about, the critical menu pages and those things. Understanding what those pages are is really important. One thing that's exciting for me is when it comes to integration of mission equipment. For example, shot over systems, they have an augmented reality mapping system, and they're now working with a lot of autopilot systems. And I'm not sure if they're working with your system or not, but essentially what you can do is the tactical flight officer can put information into the shot over mapping system. Say, for example, you're looking for an airport, you could pull it up in shot over system, and you can communicate that information directly into your autopilot system, and it'll translate from the mapping system to the autopilot system. Are you guys seeing that on the Bell side?
I've not seen that yet, but I can see how it can be done pretty easily.
it's pretty cool. I think, again, going back to the IMC scenario, we're encouraging our air crews to work cohesively in these situations. Obviously, in a high stress situation such as IMC, you're going to try and delegate tasks. Hey, TFO, can you pull up the nearest airport and punch it in so we can, get directions essentially to that airport?
Yeah.
We do have that. I don't know if we're doing it with shot over yet. I'm sure Bell is doing something. I mean, we use shot over on all of our law enforcement aircraft. But yeah, using it to navigate different places, we use our autopilot for that as well.
Yeah. Bell's done a great job of really leading, I think, the technology side of things. Getting into 505, for example, I was blown away at the avionics suite, how the information all transferred from one to the next. As a pilot, it just seemed the information that was available made sense what I was looking at. So you guys have done a really good job of like being at the forefront of that stuff. So I'm excited to see how things continue to evolve when it comes to systems integration and different features that exist within the current operations. Can you talk about just a few of the features of the autopilot system that exist within Bell?
Well, like I said before, with Dash 24 software for 407, you'll have SARS capability, which will be search and rescue, where the autopilot system apply grid pattern. So that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
Law enforcement and EMS. It's going to be a huge win. See any other systems? None that I can think of right now. What about you, Don? You got any besides the SARS program?
I wouldn't say like anything that maybe other OEMs aren't necessarily doing, other than Bell will hopefully be the first commercial helicopter to have fly-by-wire. I mean, that's just going to be huge. I think we're not expressing that enough. I think that's going to be huge. And from the pilot standpoint, I hear it's just one of the easiest aircraft to fly. Other things that we do is, depending on what airframe you buy, you can have two axis, 3-axis, or 4-axis autopilot. And, depending on what missions you're flying as an operator, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Especially if some of our operators, they fly with heavy external loads, they might want that 4th axis. They might want that hover control and things like that. I think we try to stay on top of pretty well.
For those that aren't familiar with the different systems, 2, 3, and 4-axis systems, can you talk about the difference just in general terms?
Yeah, it's just simplest to most complex. Tad might be able to explain it a little better. It's like what parts of the helicopter you can control: pitch, roll, yaw, collective.
Yeah, I mean, pitch and roll is just pretty much, pitch is either your nose is up or nose down, and roll is you either roll to your left or roll to your right. Yaw is your tail rotor's either left or right. And, collective is just hover, hold, more or less, maintain and hover.
My agency got a 3-axis autopilot system, and when I first flew it, I was blown away. I couldn't believe how efficient the system was. I remember taking my hands off the controls for the first time, and I was actually scared, because the last thing you want to do is take your hands off the controls in a helicopter. But it took it off and guarded it really tight at first, and then I got more comfortable and understood the true value that those systems provide. You talk about the bandwidth increased bandwidth that it gives you as a pilot and as an air crew to focus on other mission critical tasks, is huge. So love these systems, love what it offers. Again, on the safety side, I think it's going to continue to improve the safety margin that we're wanting to expand in our industry. I'm hoping with IMC scenarios that we continue to see that trend where those are more survivable. And I think these systems are doing just that.
Oh, yeah.
So really excited to see the continued development of these systems and how they, again, integrate with different mission equipment, making these missions more seamless and improving the success rate in a lot of these situations. The search and rescue grid stuff you talk about is huge. I think about trying to fly those in challenging environments, high winds, low visibility, all the things that usually exist in a search and rescue environment. That takes a lot of that bandwidth, that mental workload off the plate, and you can dedicate more of your bandwidth to actually looking for the lost person that you're searching for.
Absolutely.
Again, going back to, and this will be our last point before we close out, what what advice do you guys have as far as for folks that are looking for training opportunities? If someone's like, hey, I really want to learn more about this autopilot system, how to troubleshoot, or just avionics in general, where would you recommend people start their shopping process for training?
YouTube has some great videos on the SCAS systems. I mean, that is really, I mean, honestly, if you just want to get the fundamentals down, YouTube's a great place. Just look up, the SCAS system. It'll give you a lot of information. Kind of sort of like, oh, it makes sense now. But I mean, there's a lot of books and so forth out there. It digs down pretty deep, but a lot of information on YouTube. I mean, it's just it's a pretty handy little tool.
YouTube University.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's it. Yeah, you can do brain surgery with YouTube now.
I would also just say, from my perspective, again, as somebody who didn't naturally come into avionics, it didn't have a knack for it. I would say, don't be afraid to troubleshoot the hard stuff, right? That is how you're going to get a knack for it, is by going and working. If you have somebody that is in your shop that's really good at avionics, or just is really determined at avionics, both of those things can be a great thing, in my opinion. I would say just work through it, and you'll learn the most by those types of situations, by working through something that you didn't know about in the beginning and having to read up on it. And I just would say, don't be intimidated by that. I think you'd be surprised at how many people we talk to that think they're really going to mess up some avionics. But for the most part, unless you're just absolutely going out of your way to do wild things like rewire power and grounds, I don't know. You're not going to mess up any avionics components just through basic troubleshooting.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like the most growth happens in that area where you're uncomfortable, and we're always wanting to live in a comfortable space, but we're also wanting to become more effective and efficient at whatever it is we're doing. And again, to your point, I think living in an uncomfortable space is the best place for growth. So I love your comment there on that. If there was one misconception that relates to avionics and troubleshooting and maybe even autopilot systems in general, what would you say the one misconception is, if one comes to mind? And Don, we'll start with you.
My biggest misconception is that people think it's harder than mechanical work. It's different than mechanical work. It is definitely not harder, especially coming from the completions world and seeing what some of these structural mechanics can do and what some of these just day-to-day maintainers can bust out in a few hours. I mean, it's not harder. It is different. And if you could learn that side of it, I promise you can learn this side of it. So just get comfortable using your computer. That's where the industry is going, but don't be intimidated by it. Really is. I used to always tell my guys, I could take any good mechanic and turn him into a good avionics tech. It's no different than what you're doing now. How'd you learn to do what you're doing now? You read the book. You did it, right?
Yeah. Love it. Last follow-up question, then Tad, I'll go to you for your insight. I like asking what people's favorite tool is. So what's your favorite tool? Like the one thing that you're like, I can't go without this one thing. And people have said things as simple as a flashlight to, some handcrafted tool they've developed for something. What would you say your one must-have favorite tool is?
My laptop. It's got all the data that I need.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'd have to agree, especially like going to this side of things, more on what we do day to day. It's got to be my laptop.
Very cool. Love it.
Yeah, with the systems, I mean, it's pretty much all computer driven.
Well, thank you guys for your time. Thank you for your insight. Last question I have, I promise. I think I keep saying last question, but this is the last one. For folks that are wanting to get in touch, that have questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys, and where do they start?
Yeah, so you can get any of my information if you're a Bell operator through my Bell, and then just customer support. It'll bring up my region, and you can have my number, my work number, and my email all through there. But DLEHTO@bellfly.com if you guys want to email me or have any questions. That's where you can reach me.
Cool. Tad?
Yeah, so you can reach me through my Bell as well, just through product support. And of course, you can reach me through email, KMORLEY@bellflight.com.
All right. Well, hey, thank you again for your expertise, for sharing all the information you guys shared today. Be very, very valuable for folks as they navigate this unfamiliar territory for a lot of folks. So again, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you guys at the next show.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Bell Tech Talk segment of Vertical MRO Podcast. We want to hear from you. Have a technical topic for the team or a favorite technical tip? Let us know. Our email is techtalk@bellflight.com. That's TECHTALK@bellflight.com. If you're having a technical issue with the aircraft, as always, our team is here 24/7 at product support@bellflight.com. If you like what you heard, subscribe and come back for more.